Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cataloging Cocktails, where we all hang out and talk about data in an honest, no BS, non-salesy kind of way. Data management and tasty beverages in hand. I'm Tim Gasper, Director of Product over at data.world, and joined by my partner in crime, Juan.
Hey, good afternoon. Tim, how are you doing?
Doing awesome. I'm playing around with some new hardware here. We're trying to see if we can make my voice sound like I'm not being strangled underneath the water. And so we're trying to make all our new listeners happy with some better audio.
Oh, that's awesome. I also have a nice microphone set up here, and it looks like every time we're going to get better and better at this. It's been pretty cool knowing how we're starting to get more followers, people listening to us through the podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. So that's very cool. Join us, and also know that we have also our Slack community. You go to slack.data.world, and you can join the channel there, keep the conversations going. And here we are. So cheers. Always great to have this break in the middle of the week and chat about data.
Yeah, absolutely. And
what are you drinking today?
I've got keeping it simple here. I was thinking of making a cocktail, but sometimes it's easier just to go straight for it. I'm drinking a little bit of Weller right now. It's not bad. It's a little alcohol forward. I find that it tastes good in a Manhattan if you want to add it to a cocktail.
Not bad.
What about you?
I'm drinking rum, Dictador, and it is a Colombian rum, and it's a very nice sweet flavor to it. I really enjoy this.
Interesting. Do you sometimes drink rum straight? I've actually never really drank rum straight before.
Oh, rum should always be drinking straight.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh man, I'm learning something here. I'm expanding my horizons. If anybody's got some drinks over at home or at work or wherever you are today, first of all, if you're at work and you're drinking, that's very cool. You have a cool place to work. But please post in the chat. We're interested to hear what you're drinking.
Yeah, what are you drinking and where are you from? It'd be great to hear. And always remember, you can send your questions on chat. And after these 30 minutes, we'll open up the conversation to everyone. So I guess I always like to make the recap of what we've been going on for the last couple of months now, right? So we've been talking a lot about agile data governance. We've talked about the 10 principles that we've kind of put out there about data governance. So many conversations about data personas, like your producers, your consumers. Actually, our most popular podcast already has been the data product manager, which has been a very big, nice buzzword that's been going around, and people are really seeing the value of it. I've had a lot of conversations around that.
Yeah, and we had a great guest for that one too, with Claire from the Zebra, talking about their data product management practice over there.
Exactly. And then last week we had this conversation about catalogs versus data lakes and the chicken and egg, and how we can, and our thoughts about we should be able to go do these both at the same time. And I think lately, one of the topics that we see a lot, just side conversations with our prospects, with our customers, and with other colleagues, is this notion about data quality. It's truly something that comes up all the time, and there's just so much to unravel here. Let's go chat a little bit about data quality. What's your experience with data quality, Tim?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like data quality is one of those things that, so I've never worked at a really big company that has been doing data quality at sort of really large scale or with a really large data or IT team. Obviously, I've interacted with a lot of teams that have been doing it and either been providing them consulting or providing them enterprise software in that context. But I feel like, especially for a lot of the places I've worked, data quality has just been a fact of life, right? We're trying to get to certain insights. We're trying to achieve certain reports and analytical use cases, and there's the obstacles you face along the way. And a lot of times those obstacles have to do with challenges around data quality. And I'll give one sort of horror story that I've kind of experienced, and I'm sure that others probably have some similar experiences, is that at one of my previous roles, we were trying to roll out a pretty major new set of actually customer-facing dashboards and BI and things like that, right? They wanted to understand how their product was being used. They wanted to understand, they were storing customer data. And so we had a lot of data that we already to customers. Let's just make some views that are customer facing, right? And then we'll be done, right? This will be the easiest 1 month product we ever went to market with. I worked on that project for over 12 months. And one of the primary things is that as we started to get some reports in the hands of customers, they started to figure out for us, which is never a great thing, what was wrong with our data. And they're like, well, why does that number not match that number? And we're like, well, that's kind of innocuous. That's probably not too bad of a problem. But we started to look into it, and it's because, those two numbers were being taken from two different databases with two different sort of ETL pipelines to get to those numbers. And we were showing them both on the same dashboard. Oops, that's probably not a good idea, right? And as we start to dig in, we started to uncover that for all these metrics, we probably had about 100 metrics that we were exposing. There were all sorts of different inconsistencies in the time frame that they came from, where they were coming from, the context by which that number makes sense. And sometimes things as simple as, a where clause here versus a filter here versus, seemingly very small differences can result in different business logic around those different things. And so that was one example for me where we learned sort of the hard way that our lack of focus on data quality resulted in us having to troubleshoot and take the long path on getting data to a better place.
Yeah, I have so many interesting issues of working with customers. The ones that I love are the ones where you have null values. Now, this is something fascinating because when I put my academic hat on, the database community, the database theory community have been researching how do you treat nulls in theory and in practice. And it's really interesting to see what really happens in practice. I mean, once for me, my favorite example was we were building a large knowledge graph, an e-commerce knowledge graph for one of our customers. And so we're defining, right, all the concepts. So a customer places an order has a shipping address, an order can only have one shipping address and stuff like that. And people are navigating the data and querying the data, and there's a mistake. There's missing data. Like, what do you mean there's missing data? I mean, we go through this well-governed process. And when we start looking into and look at the queries that we're doing, we realize that the missing data is just a handful of orders are missing shipping data. Like, they don't know where the order was shipped. And like, how is this possible? Well, when we start looking into this, we look at the database schema, and there's nothing that is violating the constraints in the database. But when we look at the table, it's actually the key, the foreign key, it was nullable. And then when we look into and just do a quick aggregation and count the nulls, we're like, wow, there's a significant chunk of orders here that have null values in their shipping address ID. And we're like, how is that even possible? So I literally, I got contacted with the customer service folks, and I said, can you do me a favor, look up this order number and see where it was shipped? And I swear to you, this was true. The customer service says, oh, there's an error. It says null pointer exception on my screen. So definitely there is all these issues about nulls, and they don't even know. And I'm like, wait, there's money assigned to this. This order was from last year. The money was received. This was shipped somewhere. Nobody knows where it was shipped. And I just find that fascinating that this type of stuff happens. And at the end, right, you can go clean up the data and things, but at some point, you know that there's a bug, and it's not probably, the bug is not in the database, it's the bug in the application that's writing to the database. So at the end, you realize that these data quality issues is not truly just the data itself. It's like there's data comes in, there's data comes out, and context is key here. So I think that's one of the most important issues that that was something I really learned, that where we understand the context and where the stuff is coming from. So I think that's one of the interesting things, and I found that super fascinating to have a customer service tell me null pointer exception, because there was literally in the database, we don't know. Or you don't know if a null is, it means yes, it means no, it means I don't know, it means 1, it means 0. I mean, I've seen times where they say null means 0, but what do you mean? There's already zeros in the column. Well, it is what it is. Or a null is a conditional. If it's null here, then you have to go look up this other column. And if it's null there, you have to go look up this other column. There's just so much weird logic. Yeah. This is quality of data, right?
Yeah. Well, and nulls is a very interesting one. I actually remember a situation at a previous company I worked at where we had to do some conditional logic for some analytics, and we assumed that everything was true and false, right? It was a Boolean, right? And so we were going on many months assuming that our metrics were in good shape, but every once in a while something would come up where we're like, why do the count of records not equal what we were expecting, and that kind of thing, right? And we found out that actually sometimes instead of a true and a false, there was a null in that column. You know, maybe 1% was nulls, right? And the nulls were false. They were the same as false, and we needed to rewrite them to be false. But you know, sometimes that kind of stuff, like it's so quiet, right? It's like when you're typing and autocorrect corrects it to another correct word, and you know, it's like how do you even know what's wrong unless you're looking at it from sort of the business context standpoint, right?
And then, I mean, and it's not that you get an error, right? So, and then sometimes if you're not dealing with it, the differences in your results of your query may be minimal, may be negligible, you may not even notice. But maybe that null was something important that was missing. I mean, if I'm adding things up and the null was supposed to mean 1, that's one difference. But if the null is supposed to mean 100, 1,000, that's a big difference, right? But how do we know? So I think this is one of the stuff that I find always fascinating. And actually, I'm working one of the research collaborations we have with the University of Edinburgh and University of Paris is on understanding null values in the real world and stuff. I find this fascinating about it. But I think something we're talking about nulls here, about quality, but what is data quality? And some people have actually added some things but what do you call data quality, Tim? How do you define it?
That's an awesome question. You know, I always try to talk about data quality in like very simple terms, because I think you can start to nerd out about data quality. You can go in a business direction, you can go in a technical direction. I tend to focus on like 2 key attributes. One is the trustworthiness of data, and then the other is the usability of data. And I think that when you look at those 2 things, that creates an interesting set of follow-up questions and brings up some interesting thoughts in terms of the right culture, the right business process, you know, and I think we'll probably talk about some of those things before we wrap up today. But it makes you think about first the trust context, like how do I know that this is good data, the right data, timely data, you know, where the lineage is clear, understandable data, right? But then there's an aspect of data quality which doesn't fully get encompassed by trust. You have to add the usability aspect. Can I actually leverage the data for my use case? Is it you know, described in a way that I can put to work quickly? Is it accessible? Sort of so on and so forth. So those are the 2 things that I tend to gravitate towards, and then I kind of think of all the things that kind of radiate out from that. What do you think, Juan?
Well, so definitely, so I agree with that. The trustworthiness and usability. The other aspect I think is, when we've mentioned this already, is context. And I think a lot of that really depends on who's consuming it, right? For what reason, and even the same user, depending on the different use cases that they are working on, they can see it differently. And it also comes around as like, well, if we make a list of all the things that we need to go consider about data quality, like we can come up with all these different metrics that we need to go do. For things like, well, if this column is supposed to be an integer, well, there better be numbers in here, not floats, right? Or the dates are well formatted and things like, yeah, those are kind of, it's called structural data quality aspects that we need to consider. But it's not just that. It's not just the quantitative aspects of how does the form of the data look like. It's do we even have, for example, the semantics right? I mean, so when we talk about revenue, or the example I always bring up, we talk about the net sales of an order. Having that correct definition, that's quality too. I can provide the net sales of an order is supposed to be a float, and it's decimals, and it's supposed to have a currency, and has to have 0.00, right? Or just 2 numbers at the end. But if we don't even know that I'm returning the right data, consistent data, I think that's also big parts of that. So I think there's like the structural part, let's call it the syntactic part of data, but there's also making sure that the semantics, the true meaning of the data, is right, and we can go trust about it. And I think it's also being being able to provide the consumer the data can figure things out on their own. So if I look at a piece of data, I can self-service what this data is supposed to be. I can say, I can trust this data or not, or I sufficiently trust this data, or if I'm not clear if I trust this data, I know who I can go talk to and kind of figure that out. I think that's also part of the data quality. So it's not just a very clean 1 and 0 type of approach. There's a lot of spectrum in here, and there's human involvement always. We always see that there's all these tools and techniques that people want to be able to add, and automation to be able to go clean our data. But it's much more than just eliminating white spaces, organizing the format of time, of date and time. It's much more than that. That's just scratching the surface.
Yeah, no, totally agreed. And I think that there's a huge use case driven aspect to data quality, where I think if you do try to take a one size fits all approach, it often doesn't work too well, right? And you need to combine that with thinking about, what are the right expectations, and kind of thinking about, when there's sort of like the big six, quality dimensions out there that are like completeness and accuracy and validation, and there's a couple others. There's a lot of things you can do to measure around those different things. But depending on what one you're looking at, like, for example, things like accuracy and timeliness and completeness, there's a huge use case and business case element to it that you have to apply for it to make sense. One thing that I think is interesting, Dean is making an awesome comment here in the comments about, some of the things that are sort of obvious things. I think that there are a lot of validations, and I would agree that it would be nice if we always did, right? It'd be nice if there was sort of a table stakes of validation, in addition to a lot of the use case driven stuff that could help with data quality. And I'm curious, what some folks think are some of the best practices there. I know that one thing that we've liked over at data.world is using a tool called DBT. It's database tools. And one of the nice things about DBT is, because you're defining all these transformations in your data pipeline essentially as SQL code, everything is defined as code. You can also do these tests, and actually a lot of tests are built into the framework where you can do things like look at primary key relationships and things like that, and do some of these types of obvious checks, ahead of time. But then layer in business checks too, right? So the business context piece still has to come into play. So
I think that's key, right? We can have, I think these structural aspects, or these, call it syntactic aspects I was talking about, are about, yes, is this the foreign key and primary key? Does this validate the constraints and everything I have? But then you have more of the semantic side is connected to the business, right? An order can only have one shipping address. It has to have exactly one shipping address to no more, right? These types of things that you could say, maybe the data where it's coming from is, for some reason, doesn't have these foreign key constraints or whatever. So there's no constraints that's being violated, but from a business perspective, there is, and we want to be able to go track that. These is also has to go deal with data quality, even though the numbers or whatever are all correct. But see, the other aspect I see a lot is, when you start talking to more technical folks, they're focusing more on this syntactic side. And I think we forget the big picture. And I ask always, what does success look like? So how do we define success when we're doing it, when we're doing data quality? How do is it just one stop, like I'm successful and I'm done? Or how do we keep doing this like iteratively? What do you think? I got my thoughts, but I want to throw it to you first.
yeah, sure. Two things that I'll comment, and then I'm kind of curious as to your thoughts. One is, I think you do have to have some idea of sort of use cases and a use case backlog. And I think this ties a lot into the agile data governance approach that we've been talking about, and really prioritizing the work that's going to be done with the data. And that kind of takes you to the second point, which is that I think you have to start prioritizing your data sources a little bit, because I do think it's hard to look at all data and try to address data quality in an omnibus kind of fashion. And I think that if you can use those use cases as your guide and kind of take that and then drive it towards your data quality priorities, that's going to help a lot. Because that starts to put things in context in terms of like, what's going to be most valuable here, and where is there the most potential for issues, right? Is the issue more around timeliness? Is it more around the completeness of the data? And it kind of aims you in the right direction. But those are some of my first thoughts on that. Kind of curious as to what you're thinking, Juan.
Well, so one thing, I think I'm going to probably get a tattoo on this, which is don't boil the ocean. Remember, don't boil the ocean. And this is something that it's just so frustrating. I mean, it's like when people come in and say, can you go catalog all my data? I got 100,000 columns to go catalog, 1,000. I mean, okay, what are you going to do with this if I go catalog all that? That's one. And then they're going to say, well, can you please tell me the quality of all of my data? It's like, so what? You want to go literally boil the ocean, get that? And let's imagine I have a magic wand and I'm going to go catalog and go tell you that the quality is from 0 to 100. I'm going to score it for you already at 100%. What are you going to go do with that? You get that for 100,000 columns. So what? I think this is the first thing that we should not be thinking about. And it's frustrating that when you're having conversations with in organizations and you're talking to technical folks, that's what they see what success looks like. And I think that's completely wrong. That's not the path to go forward. We really need, so I completely agree with you. Again, it's always, what is the use case? What's the business use case? Like, we're doing this work to be able to provide value. What value and to whom? But also the big part there of success is it's culture. And it's, you really want to have a culture within your organization that values, values data, but values who's actually responsible for the data. And this goes back to topics that we've had before about the data product manager and the knowledge scientist, which that's what I'm pushing, at least. That should be the people who are responsible for the data. Data quality is that too. And I want people to demand responsibility for the data, who demand quality of data. And I want to make sure that I'm providing quality data and I'm working towards that quality. And we understand that it's a team sport. I mean, this is not just 1-2 people doing it. It's everybody within the organization going through that culture. So I think enabling or moving towards that culture is key to be able to have a successful kind of data quality projects, to call it that way.
Yeah, no, I think that's huge. And I think that, you should be asking yourself some questions about your organization or the groups that you're working with. Who is accountable for data, right? Do we have a culture of responsibility and accountability for data? Do we have executive representation around quality of data, right? Does the chief data officer care about quality? Is it part of their mission? Do the leaders of the company care about quality, right? Because I think a lot of these things go into overall how people approach issues of quality. And are they truly thinking of data as sort of an asset, right? Or is data more of an afterthought, right? So yeah, culture is huge, and it's not easy to change, right? We see companies all the time trying to tackle data literacy initiatives and things like that. It requires a very concerted effort.
So in addition to like the people and the processes, there's still tools and techniques and features that you want. And a couple of the things that I've thought that it's not like a data quality tool, your toolkit that will do data quality. For example, we've talked about this before, like data lineage. Data lineage is really key to be able to understand, okay, something's going on here. Why is this going on? Let's go understand it. I think lineage is one of those key things. A lot of things we also see, for example, is people want to go profile, right? The typical, let me go ingest my data or connect to my data and see what's going on about it and give some sort of those metrics, which I don't want the people to perceive that I'm against those metrics. No, we definitely do need those metrics, but it's not the only thing. What else is on your mind about kind of technical features that need to be part of the data quality toolkit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of them is sort of obvious, but I'll state it anyway. It's a centralized repository for metadata, right? Do we have a place where we are taking the business context, the technical information? Usually organizations we see are using various different tools to get a picture of quality, and you want to bring all that information together in one place, right? So you get the context in a single sort of view. So that's one thing, obviously, right? Another one that I'll put out there is sort of this rules or data quality inspections, right? And you'll see that in terms of things like, sensitive data identification, right? Where are there,
PII.
potential PII and, emails and social security numbers, et cetera, credit cards, right? But also things like, should a value be over a certain amount? Should it be below a certain amount? Is there a certain smoke test, a certain query you should be running on a regular basis to make sure that you're getting expected results?
You want to have that scorecard, right? So you want to have a set of these rules, like these business rules that will define the quality of the data and say, hey, every day, green light, yellow light, how's it going? And what parts are what rules are failing? Then you can go
Exactly. Being careful not to boil the ocean, obviously, but there are ways to do that in a way that is targeted and not one size fits all, right? There should not just be a single testing framework that applies to all your data. It is really contextual to the columns that you're looking at, to the data sets that you're looking at.
But so I wanted to say is that just was a reminder of talking about emails here was, I remember once of one customers who the way they were defining if a customer was out of, they had opted out, is that if they would update the email and they would put bad email underscore and then the rest of the email. So that's all they did. So then the funny thing is that somebody else was going off and sending out emails, like sending marketing emails, and they were getting a bunch of bounced emails. And what was so funny is that every email that they sent out cost, I don't know how many pennies or whatever. And suddenly they're getting all this, they're paying for all this money that's for these emails that are being bounced. And they realize, oh yeah, it's like we have, I don't know, 20% of our emails have bad email underscore. And it was a correct email, right? It was still a string at another string dot whatever, but this was an example. Now you just branch it up email for there. But going back to the features, I think you also want to have features in the data quality features in like metadata management systems, but you also want to have the processes associated to them. So you want to be able to have good review cycles. I think this is something that we're talked about before that we want to bring in from software engineering. Let's do peer review, for example. We're generating data. We're defining how we're cleaning the data. We're defining these rules, but is this the right way? Like somebody did that work. Let's go peer review to make sure that is the right way of being able to go that we define the good data quality measurements for that. So I think like peer review to understand what is that process is very key also, and that's a process combined with the tools.
Yep, I'm 100% on the same page there, and I think this is interesting. We've covered a lot of ground here. I think that there's a lot to unpack when it comes to data quality, and think about how to do it in a way that doesn't boil the ocean and really prioritizes the most important use cases first. Where do you think the key takeaways are, Juan? What's your I always appreciate that you have a tendency to really see through the noise and you get straight to the signal. So what's the signal on this data quality noise that we have going on here?
Well, as always, right? 30 minutes flies by. So just to wrap up, takeaway, I think this is a takeaway for every single episode. I'll bring it up. Boiling the ocean, right? We have to avoid boiling the ocean. There's always going to be this temptation to manage data quality through a bunch of quantitative metrics, which is going to lead us to boiling the ocean. We should be careful with that temptation. We need to manage quantitative metrics, but that's not the whole thing. We really need to focus on use cases, and those use cases are going to be focused on the highest value use cases will help us focus on which are the most important data sets. So don't boil the ocean by focusing on quantitative metrics. Make sure you understand what are your high value use cases. And then even though there are needs for technical features, right? Data profiling, lineage, inspections, that isn't by itself. It needs to be associated with some sort of processes like agile data governance. And finally, culture. We need to really embrace data responsibility. It's not just tech, it's a team sport.
Yep, I 100% agree. I think this has been a great little chat. I appreciate always Juan being able to do that. And I think for those that are listening, please hang out after, and we'll do a little roundtable here as we usually do. And check out our blog post. We just dropped a blog post on blog.data.world about data quality, talking about some of these topics here, but also talking about some additional ones. Check that out and definitely let us know what you think. We're interested to hear what your thoughts are. And Juan, do you want to quickly, before we end things, go ahead, yeah.
One reminder is next week, I'm really excited. Next week, we have a special episode. We'll be joined by Dean Alamang, Fabian Gondon, and James Henry. They're the authors of the book Semantic Web for the Working Ontologist, which is a book coming out in its 3rd edition. We're going to be discussing the past, the present, the future of semantic web and how that's impacting enterprise data management today. So I'm really excited for that next episode.
Yeah, it'll be really cool. So yeah, looking forward to all seeing you tomorrow, and bring some friends because that's going to be a really great discussion.
Thanks, Tim.